What is up, guys? I'm John.
My name is Chris.
And we are the Heck. And today we're going to be checking out another freaking Overlord lore video. This one is Tier Magic Leveling Explained, how the scales of magic work.
Oh, yeah.
Mother freaking Overlord.
Need to know.
Listen, I'm of the mind to think that like me and you might be kind of a rarity, but I also feel like there's a lot of people out here who watch our videos as well too, who are also straight up gaming nerds, okay? Because like both of us are over here like, I really wonder how this works. I really wonder how that works. So especially after the last episode where he talked about like you could lose levels or you could lose XP if something happens, it really got me thinking a lot about the leveling system, and the next video in his freaking playlist is this.
Oh, yeah.
So it made sense to check this one out. So if you guys are new to our channel, smash the sub button. If y'all are watching this on our Patreon, thank you very much. We're going to be doing at least an episode or two of this every week. Hopefully we're shooting for 2. But yeah, that's what we're going for.
Yeah.
So let's freaking do this, man. Freaking boom. And then hit that little play button. Whoop up.
Overlord Season 3, so I think it's time to start ramping up the amount of Overlord content I put out. Last episode, I talked a bit about the history of Yggdrasil as a game, the world itself, as well as almost everything to do with how characters were created and customized. This time, we're going to take a closer look at the leveling and the comprehensive magic system. I know, it's only 2 components of the game, but trust me, there's enough detail regarding the magic in Yggdrasil that you could actually write your own encyclopedia on
We got
it.
sponsorship
But
video?
first, this video is sponsored by Amino
can't
Apps.
watch
the thumbnail for
sponsorships,
one of my
though. I don't know why,
upcoming
but there's
videos.
something
Now,
about
let's get back into this one.
watching sponsorships.
Let's start with one of the most fundamental components of any video game, the leveling system. Just a reminder though, we're talking about the world of Yggdrasil here, which differs ever so slightly from the new world in the way that it functions. But as you already know, a player of Yggdrasil has both racial and class levels that make up their total level that maxes out at 100. And just like in any other game, you level up by gaining experience. But also, unlike many other games of this kind, levels gained were neither permanent nor even that hard to come by. That's because when you died, the penalty was a loss of 5 levels, regardless of what level you were.
Whoa.
So if you were less than level 5 and died, then your character would literally be erased from existence and you would just disappear from the game.
What?
Now this wasn't meant to be punishment for being trash at the game or anything like that. Gaining those levels back were actually quite easy since experience points could be found pretty much anywhere and everywhere. No, dying was more of a system that allowed players to rework their characters with different class and racial builds so that they could continuously test to find the one that was best suited to them.
So you like
The developers were even noted for saying that they didn't want their players to have a greater fear of losing levels over exploring the vast world that they had created. Though losing levels wasn't something to worry about, dropping a random piece of equipment upon death most definitely was. But we can talk about items on a later date. Once a character reaches the max level of 100, they're still allowed to gain experience points, but only enough to get you to 99.99% of the way to level 101. This was because certain skills and abilities required experience points to be activated or cast, so there was always a pool of experience available for the players to draw from without having to worry about reducing their level below 100. Another aspect of Yggdrasil that went hand in hand with the levels was the skill points. As I mentioned last episode, depending on the race of the character you were determined the number of skill points that were gained with each level, and each skill point gained allowed for more skills to be learned and then buffed in terms of strength. Now let's move on to the magic. I love looking into a tier system like this because it's a good scale to show just how strong everyone from Nazarick is in comparison to the rest of the New World. In the universe of Overlord, there exists 2 types of magic. There's the tier magic, which is used by both the players of Yggdrasil and the inhabitants of the New World. Then there's the wild magic, which is the only magic that existed in the New World up until some certain events that are too spoiler-filled to talk about.
Son of a! I want to know what them events are! Dang it!
For now, we're just going to focus on the tier magic, because that's what was used in the game. Players were able to choose from a massive collection of over 6,000 spells to add to their build.
Good God.
These were divided into 4 main categories, which were then further divided into an ever-branching tree of types, which were then classified into 10 tiers, and an extra super tier that doesn't even get a number because they're so OP they actually break the balance of the game. Well, I made that part up, but still, they're pretty OP. So the first of the 4 categories are Arcane. This would be the magic used by sorcerers or elementalists to cast spells like lightning or fireball. Then there's divine magic, which are used by clerics or priests to heal or buff allies. Third is the spiritual magic from shamans or talisman users to cast more abstract or psychic spells. Then everything else falls into the alternative 4th category. Pretty much spells from any other class like paladins, cursed knights, or bards. A good way to think about it is if you play Hearthstone, then mage spells are arcane, Druid and Priest spells are divine, and Shaman spells are spiritual. Then Warlock, Rogue, Paladin, and Warrior would all just be alternative. Hopefully that helps you wrap your head around how they're categorized. If we get into the tiers now, this kind of seeps into the New World a little bit, but it's really good for giving a perspective on where everyone stands on the power scale. So starting from the bottom, we have the first tier. Obviously, it's the starting point for every Yggdrasil player, but in the New World, some people aren't even here and have to be classified in a 0 tier. That aside though, tier 1 is where most practical spells can be learned, but nothing that can really help you win in an offensive fight. The second tier is a bit more rare. It's indicative of a bit more talent because you can use a spell like Shockwave. If you've dedicated yourself to being a magic caster in the New World, then this is where you'd want to be. Third tier brings us to the level of Flight and Lightning magic. Both strong defensive and offensive magic spells are cast from this tier. Well, strong from the perspective of the New World. Anyway, this is where you'll find what most platinum ranked adventurers are capable of. Fourth tier consists of even stronger arcane spells and is where Orichalcum adventurers sit. Then the 5th and 6th tier are considered the highest tier of magic that humans are capable of using. 7th tier gets to the level of magic that the Guardians like to use. We've seen Demiurgus use the 7th tier magic Hellfire Wall, and Nabe use Chain Dragon Lightning alongside Greater Teleportation. It is only through the combined efforts of highly skilled magic casters in the New World that they are able to produce makeshift 7th tier spells. The 8th, 9th, and 10th are just considered God mode, not even thought to exist in the New World. But as we saw in the fight between Shaltir and Ainz, the majority of spells used there were 10th tier ones. And finally, we have the unofficial 11th tier, or more formally known as the... A player first learns a super tier spell after level 70. And for each level gained after level 70, they can learn one more for a maximum of 30 in their build. Though they act more like skills rather than spells because instead of consuming MP, it simply has a massive cooldown. At first, you could only use them once per day, but that can then be reduced with a bit of leveling. Once at the max level, that once per day limit can then be decreased to a minimum of 4 times a day. As you'd expect, casting these types of spells takes a fair bit of time as well. So much so that if you're in a party, the rest of your party members would have to dedicate themselves to protect you while you finish casting it. This is because if you were to take a certain amount of damage while casting, which is already a vulnerable state to begin with, the spell would be cancelled altogether. Not only that though, once one super tier spell has been cast in a party, the entire party has to wait for the cooldown to be finished in order for another super tier spell to be cast.
Dude, I cannot wait for this movie.
This was in order to prevent players from just spamming their ultimate moves one after the other during PvP fights. Super tier spells were meant to be game changers, so there needed to be a lot of strategy in place when deciding to use one. But how are these spells, both super and regular alike, actually cast though? Well, they actually went pretty in depth as to how the mechanics of magic casting would work in a DMMORPG. It starts with first learning the magic, which wasn't as simple as just putting a skill point into it. There was a set list of prerequisites that needed to be met in order for certain magic to be learned. Things like being a certain class, participating in special events, and using specific items all led to the unlocking of certain magic. Then, just like with any skill tree, there needed to be a base of magic spells that were first learned in order for you to be able to learn others. Once you have your spells learned, your console has hotkeys that range from 1 to 10 that let you choose the tier of magic that you want to use.
It's cool. It actually
Those
shows
keys
like
can
the
also be
hotkeys and all that
customized
stuff
and
that you
arranged
would
in
have
any
used.
order, which is what Ainz did to allow himself to memorize the key inputs to cast all 718 of his spells. Once a spell is selected, an icon would then appear in front of you, which you would then select in order to start the casting. While casting, you can now apply your meta magic enhancements
We
or
still
more
haven't
simply
found
spell
out like
buffs
who
to
is in
further
charge of
modify
doing
the spell
that to
that you're
her.
using. I'll talk more specifically about those in just a second though.
Like
so
her being
once the cast
brainwashed?
has started, something called an arcane
We still
eye
haven't
would appear
figured
in
that
front
out.
of the caster. This basically acts as a smart cast system. It shows just how far and how wide that your spell will hit, and you can aim it by using your right hand to adjust the direction and your left hand to adjust the range. It seems to not have been as simple as just point and click, but required a bit of coordination, especially if it was a skill shot type spell. What defined a great magic caster in the game though was their ability to just shit out as many effective spells as possible. Since your arsenal could have up to 480 hotkeyed spells, then understanding how to activate each of them and what each of them did was essential to bringing out the most of your kit.
Like,
It's interesting that as a magic caster, your actual ability to retain knowledge played a heavy component in how skilled you were, whereas with a warrior, your actual reflexes would determine your skill. Which is pretty cool to see how the game takes into account real-world qualities. As for how many times that you can use your spells in one go, it was all dependent on your mana points. The base amount of MP that you had was your level times 10, but as we saw in Ainz's stat card, he definitely has more than the 3000 base.
Yeah.
According to the web novel, the type of tier magic you use determines the amount of MP you spend with each cast. So say you had 10 MP, then you could either use a first tier spell 10 times or just use a 10th tier spell once. But I'm sure there were also spells that used more MP than just what they were classified as in their tier list. Anyway, once your MP was depleted, there was no way to recover them other than by waiting the 6 hours needed to fully restore them, or you could probably reduce this time by buffing your MP regeneration stats.
I was
Either
actually
way,
nervous
it still
about
wouldn't be
Einstein
the best
that
idea
fight
to spam
'cause
out
I had
spells
no
until you
idea.
have no
It was
mana.
so early on this
Now,
show.
the last component of magic are the meta magic enhancements. These can be applied to each of your spells as you cast them. I'm sure you're actually already familiar with most of them without even realizing it. Most of the spells that Ainz uses in the anime have had a buff applied to them in the form of these enhancements. So a few of the familiar ones would be the Maximize Magic, which increases the attack power of a spell, Twin and Triplet Magic, which basically shoots the spell twice or 3 times in parallel with each other, Widen Magic, which increases the range of a spell, Silent Magic, which eliminates the need to recite it, Penetrate Magic, which increases the potency of your attack to make it more likely to strike through defenses, Boost Magic, which upgrades the spell to the next tier, Delay Magic, that adds a delay to the release of a spell after it's finished casting, Extend Magic, that increases the duration of a spell, and finally, Over Magic, that allows the caster to use a spell a tier higher than what they're normally capable of. These are just the most general ones, but there's also more situational ones that are more tailored to class and race specific buffs and debuffs. So yeah, that's the magic of Yggdrasil in a nutshell. I could go into even more detail if I was talking about the New World, but that's a video that's set for a later date. Obviously, there's a need for a part 3
I love
for this
like I could
and I
talk
believe
about
that
this,
should be the
but I
final
will
one explaining this
later.
vast game world. And then we can finally start moving back to the characters and talk about how strong they really are.
So like before we actually got into this video, before we sat down and started reacting to this, I was like, we could skip ahead to the characters. I'm glad I didn't, dude. I'm glad you were like, no, we should do it. Like just in the way that the thing is, like, cause I feel like he is trying to tell us like a story in a way.
Yeah, it's kind of like setting a base.
Yeah.
For like knowing how much they can do with their stuff or whatever.
Man, but I am really stoked to be getting into different characters, man. Beto, girl, obviously.
Yeah, I want to know more about what she can do. Because like apparently she was like classified as a tank.
Yeah. Wild, dude.
But she looked like she could whip some ass. So.
But there's so many cool characters in the show that I'm like, God, I really want to get into like knowing more about them. But that's like kind of the meat and potatoes. You've also got to have the rest of the story as well too, you know. So yeah, I'm really freaking stoked, man. This is such a cool series. And like AniNews, I think is how you say it. AniNews said it. Freaking amazing channel, dude. So please, if you guys have not yet, smash the sub button over there for sure. But they're freaking awesome, and we're going to be going through this entire playlist. If y'all haven't ever checked out the playlist that it is, it's actually Overlord Explained, and we're only on episode 3 of freaking 34. They have 34 of these. So
dude, that's rad though.
It's going to be fun though, man.
The more the merrier.
But anyway, guys, thank you very much for checking this out. These are posted first on our YouTube channel, or on our Patreon, sorry, and then uploaded to YouTube afterwards. So if you guys do want to check them out, early access, and support our channel, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below, and it helps us out, homies. But either way, that'll be good. And we'll catch you later.
Toodles. Later.
Wow.